Okay, we are live. Awesome. I am so excited about this. This is our second try doing a live hangout with the Ashlees. The first try was an amazing conversation, and due to our newness in this technology, none of the audio made it through. So we're excited to have another chance to chat with the Ashlees all about facilitation and about the book they're working on. I am Sam Killerman. I am one of the co-creators of the Safe Zone project, one of the authors of the forthcoming A Guide to Facilitation, and the other book, Unlocking the Magic of Facilitation, and one of the co-creators of the Hopeful Facilitating XYZ, which will be an online resource for all facilitators. Meg?
Hello, everybody. I am the co-parent to all of those future and current projects, the Facilitating XYZ Safe Zone project and the book we are currently writing. So I'm really excited to chat with the Ashlees, some fellow social justice facilitators who are going to introduce themselves.
Well, hello again, and thanks for hosting another conversation. My name is Kyle Ashlee. I'm a social justice educator and co-author of Vital, A Torch for Your Social Justice Journey. And again, couldn't be more excited to have another chat about social justice facilitation with y'all today.
And hi, I'm Aeriel Ashlee. Also do social justice education and facilitation. I'm really excited about co-authoring Vital, A Torch for Your Social Justice Journey with Kyle, and really excited for this conversation with Sam and Meg. So thanks so much for having us.
Yes. Okay, so to get things started, can you both just explain to everybody what Vital is about?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've explained this concept so many times, and I think we've got it down to where we know the talking points, but we've never actually captured it on camera. So this will actually be kind of a cool thing to have when all is said and done. But Vital is sort of this larger, bigger picture concept that Aeriel and I pieced together through our years of social justice facilitation, and it basically came about through having these kinds of conversations with people around diversity and identity and social justice. And it was sort of just the little bits that came up that really worked and resonated for people. So things that worked for us in our lives and our journeys, but just through having these kind of conversations, we noticed a pattern and some trends that really seemed to resonate and kind of surface as themes for people in their social justice journeys.
Mm-hmm. So Vital is an acronym, and it stands for vulnerability, identity, trust, authorship, and liberation. And like Kyle said, these are all kind of themes that we saw emerge and come up again and again. So for us, vulnerability is really about starting with yourself when you're doing social justice journeying, and looking in the mirror, doing your own work around your learning edges and your blind spots maybe in areas of privilege, and really being willing to kind of do some of that self-reflection that's really important in thinking about and exploring these issues of justice. Identity really focuses on thinking about what are social identity categories and how do we show up in them, and how does that inform how people relate to us and respond to us and our relationships with folks across difference. Trust is kind of twofold. It's one about trusting the process. So sometimes social justice journeying, it isn't smooth, it isn't comfortable. Sometimes we're dealing with really messy and complex topics, but that part of the process is to stay engaged even in those moments. And the other element of trust is about building trusting relationships with the people that you're doing your journeying and your work with. Authorship is really about story sharing. It's about focusing on empowering narratives and learning through one another's truths, right? So not just engaging in theoretical or philosophical conversations about issues of identity and diversity, but really taking the opportunity to bear witness to another person's story and their lived experience. And that sometimes it's those moments of transformation and dialogue that can be the most powerful. And then the last concept is liberation, and it kind of is both a process and an outcome. That engaging in all of these other pieces around vulnerability and identity and developing these trusting relationships and authoring our stories, we are working towards our own liberation and recognizing that our liberation is tied up in everyone else's. So that's a quick overview of what Vital's all about, and we're really excited because it weaves together kind of these strategies and ideas, but also through personal stories. So it's not too kind of heady. Hopefully it's fun for people. They can maybe see themselves or experiences that they've had in some of the stories that we write about.
Great.
Awesome. Yeah. So one thing that was coming up for me when you were sharing about Vital, particularly, I mean, even every letter, was the translation of how it can relate to your own social justice journey, and I can see my social justice journey like reflected in all of those letters, but also how so many of those letters can translate over to facilitation work. And I was wondering if there was like, maybe both of you could speak to like a letter, like how you see like vulnerability showing up in your facilitation work, or how you see identity showing up in facilitation work.
Yeah. So for me, the vulnerability piece is really kind of the one that resonates the most with me, and it kind of like clicks with my personal values. So I always try and show up as vulnerable as I can especially when I'm in facilitation spaces. I think as a facilitator, it's super important to sort of role model that vulnerability that you're hoping the group will have. And so I think that's especially true for folks with sort of dominant and privileged identities. I think being a straight white male with all those privileged identities, I think it gives you a little bit more leverage to be vulnerable. It gives you a little bit more space to take those risks, knowing that you've got privilege and you've got a little bit of wiggle room to sort of say some things that maybe other folks in the room might not be able to say. And so I think that for me is like huge. It's probably one of my core number one tenets in facilitation, is that I really try to lead with vulnerability and role model the importance of that with whatever group that we're working with.
Yeah, and I think for me, when I think about facilitation, the kind of tenet of Vital that first comes to mind is authorship, and this piece of like, how as a facilitator am I intentionally creating space for people to author their stories, and recognizing that some folks may not have ever had that experience before. And so kind of creating, whether it's like facilitated activities or quiet reflective space, changing up dynamics so that there's small groups as well as large group sharing, so that people can have, develop some confidence and some comfort in trying to navigate what it means to author your own story and to find empowerment in that, right? So maybe that could be someone with a marginalized identity who's never been asked their perspective or worldview or how they've experienced different dynamics in relationship with others. Or it might be someone who has privilege in an aspect of identity, and maybe part of their privilege is that they've never had to think about authoring what it means to be white or straight or male. And so I think, regardless of the population or the communities that you're working with, finding a way to create a space where people have a trusting enough dynamic in a group to feel comfortable authoring and sharing up some of those stories, which requires vulnerability. I think that is really essential to my facilitation approach and style, and I've really seen it be transformative for groups. When people share their stories, a lot of times that experience, that authorship and vulnerability really paves the way for deeper conversations and connections that I think are really the goal of facilitation.
That's great. And it's funny is in both of your responses, you talked about one letter, one aspect of the book, and then inherently all of the intersections of that, like vulnerability as it intersects with identity, or authorship as it intersected with both, I heard liberation in what you were talking about, as well as identity. And that nuanced understanding is something I bet you didn't have when you started your facilitation journeys, right?
Oh,
Totally.
Yeah. We always say that there is like so much a process in learning, and that, I think as facilitators, as folks who are committed to issues of social justice, like there isn't a like you've arrived kind of moment, right? There's, wow, new epiphanies, new insights, and I think always a continued eagerness and readiness to like keep learning and keep exploring in our facilitation strategies, in our own privileges, and kind of navigating and finding spaces for resilience. So yeah, it's very much a process, and I think we have learned a lot in our time so far, and are excited for how Vital can be a resource for other people as they're learning, but also I think we're excited to continue to learn and grow as folks engage with Vital and respond and react and kind of hopefully share their process with us.
Yeah, I think when we first created Vital, we knew that all of the tenets or the principles of Vital were important, and they were a part of our facilitation process and what we had learned. I think, as we've used it more and as we've written this book, we've come to realize how interconnected all of the concepts really are, in ways that, like you said, every time we talk about it, we realize new ways that they're interconnected and that they intersect. So it's this really fascinating thing that like continues to teach us about the things that are important and helpful in facilitation and in social justice work. And so we're continuing to grow and learn from it, even though it's something that like we're putting out there to help other people, learn and grow in their own journey. So. It's cool.
And that's kind of one of the cores of facilitation, right? Is the ability to be a person who facilitates learning, but also be a person who's willing to learn from that learning. Right. And to take as much out of the experience maybe as the so-called participants take out of the learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That reminds me from our first conversation, something that we talked about, but that I think is maybe worth reiterating, the like role of humility in facilitation, and how, even though Kyle and I have been doing social justice facilitation for years and made that our life's work and feel that it's our calling, that there is still so much kind of humbleness that we take each time we step into that space as a facilitator, recognizing that like the people in the room have so much to add in terms of perspective and wisdom and knowledge and context, and that there are going to be moments where we're not going to know what to say, or a group dynamic is going to be difficult to manage, and that isn't necessarily a reflection of being ill-prepared as a facilitator. In fact, your ability to kind of respond and react fluidly in that moment, and I think to show up authentically and say, like, I don't know that I have a concrete answer for that. Let's toss that back to the group and process together. I think that is a huge thing that has been helpful for us in our facilitation, and is something we're really excited about with facilitating XYZ, to see like how kind of that ethic of humility and camaraderie and sharing and learning together as facilitators can come about through this space that you all are creating.
Yeah, and I think that piece of humility and facilitation can really present really rich learning opportunities for the group. So I think of an example where we were facilitating a group, and we were talking about different aspects of identity, and I had like asked the group to like share about one specific aspect of like national identity, and I had called upon like 2 people in the group who identify that way, and I totally missed another person in the group, even though that's how they identified, and so I kind of like excluded them unintentionally. And so it was like right as soon as I did it, I realized what was going on. I'm pretty sure the rest of the group realized that I had done it as well. But we didn't really say anything in the moment, and we kind of just like glossed over it and went on and finished the day. But at the end of that day, Aeriel and I got together and kind of processed through the day, and she's like, you sort of like didn't acknowledge this person and that identity in that moment. I said, yeah, I know, I kind of blew it. And she's like, well, why don't we bring that back up tomorrow and talk about that, and talk about like what that meant, and like maybe your biases that came into play, and why you didn't acknowledge her in that moment. And so we did. We brought it back up with the group, and I said, like, I totally blew it in that moment. I'm sorry, and I kind of apologized, but it was this really rich moment for the group to see, like, this is what humility looks like from a facilitator when they say, I messed up. And not only like I messed up in some theoretical time and place, but I messed up with you. And I'm really sorry about that. But here's what we can learn from that as a group. I think like those moments can be really, really rich for the group to kind of grow and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one thing when you were talking about being able to process with each other that moment is, something that me and Sam really appreciate when we get to co-facilitate is having that opportunity to process with each other. And it's also one of the reasons we were so excited about building this Facilitating XYZ resource is for folks who either don't have that co-facilitator to like process those moments with, but even if you do, just being able to reach out to other facilitators and say, so this is how we handled it as a co-facilitation pair. What do you all think? Because one of the things that, I'm seeing and hearing in your story is this idea that, so you're professional facilitators, like people pay you to facilitate, right? But none of us are perfect, and part of our work is inherently about learning. And there's a real tension there between like, for me, some people are like, oh, you're an expert. And I'm like, ooh, but like part of my job is to not have all of the answers. And like, that's something that I would love, the future Facilitating XYZ community to be able to talk about. And I would love to know, as the mini Facilitating XYZ community that we are in this hangout, like, how do you all make sense of that tension?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think something really important to think about because, right, like in these moments where you're brought in and you're viewed as having expert knowledge or expert skill set, right, you want to be able to deliver on those things. And certainly I think we have learned that the best way to kind of improve our facilitation skill set is through practicing. And so, you know, being able to have facilitation experience informs and enables us to be more skilled facilitators because we've just seen different things come up and we have experience and context to reference. But I think at the same time also, like, not then being shy to then acknowledge in those moments of like, well, haven't had this one before, or this is new terrain and I'm figuring this out. And how do you balance that? I think, you know, with the facilitating XYZ community, something that's really intriguing and exciting for me as I think of what this could mean for future facilitators is to think about how so often we focus as facilitators on like what's happening in the dialogue space, which is really important, right? Not just the content, but the group dynamics and process. But then there's like this additional meta layer of like how are we reacting to the context, to the group dynamics, to all of that. And sometimes I've seen, and I've fallen into this myself, of like I try to process and work out some of that stuff in the dialogue, but then it really becomes about me and my learning edges as a facilitator and not about the group, right? And so through facilitating XYZ, I think there's an opportunity for facilitators to come together and kind of do some of that more meta meaning making. Like what happens? How are you triggered or not when you continually see certain themes of like who speaks first in a group dialogue? Are you noticing, are you developing your skills to pan different identities and paying attention to nuances and you know, how can we kind of support each other on that journey? And that then allows us to create this separate space to learn and grow as facilitators rather than co-opting the space that we're being asked to facilitate, right? Which is really easy to do, but you know, probably not the ideal.
And when I think about sort of the expertise question, I think it's something that like we can't shy away from as facilitators, especially in social justice conversations, because you know, the whole point of multi-partiality is that as the facilitator, it's sort of your job to provide a counter narrative to some of these dominant ideas that sort of reinforce privilege and oppression, right? And I think that is part of our role as facilitators of socially just dialogues. And so that piece of expertise means that we bring something to the dialogue about our knowledge and our experience around social justice topics and concepts. And I don't think we can ignore that. But I think when I think about expertise, the way that I frame it is that I'm an expert in my own experience, right? And every participant in the dialogue is also an expert in their own experience. And so I think that like it's really important to try and draw that expertise out for all of us and share all of that expertise. So not to say that none of us are experts and none of us don't know anything, but in fact we're all experts. We're all experts in our own experiences. So that's kind of how I think framing the expertise question is that like we all have something really important to bring to the conversation.
And a lot of that's about power, right? It's about acknowledging, naming, and then working through power dynamics in a group. And as the expert, so to speak, or as the person who's charged with facilitating the experience, the implicit power differential is that you have the power and that the group doesn't. And as a facilitator, one of the first goals I've always found to be is to help the group realize that's not the case. That this is a space where we're sharing power and we're sharing expertise and we're going to be sharing knowledge with one another. What are some ways that you have seen power play out, like in your experience, both well, in the sense of you've mitigated power differentials in a healthy way and you've led to an environment where people have access to power that they may not have outside of that space? And then what are some times where you feel like you haven't done as good of a job and you wish you could have done something different?
Gosh, that's a really good question.
Does anything come to mind first for you?
Nothing right off the bat comes to mind.
So I'm thinking a situation comes to mind. I'm not sure if it's like a good example of power balancing.
Okay, we can figure it out.
Done better. Maybe that will kind of come out in the process. But we were doing some work with a client, and there were it was professional development facilitator training for staff at a university, and in this training there were like entry-level professionals, very recent undergraduate graduates, so college graduates, and then all the way up to like directors of offices, and then like dean level professionals. But they were all together in this space learning about facilitation skills and spending a couple of days in immersive training with us. And so as a part of kind of our philosophy to facilitation, we created a space where we said, we really value vulnerability. Like, we want to name some of the intentional power balancing that's going to have to happen in this space, just because of the nature of like the position titles that you each bring into this room. But in this space, we're all trying to learn and grow as facilitators, so we got to do our best to acknowledge and work through some of that. And I think after the first half of the first morning, it became clear that wasn't exactly working out how we had hoped, that there were some folks who happened to not be sharing as readily in the group, and those folks also happened to have some of the senior-most titles in the group. And so Kyle and I... They
also held the most privileged identities as well.
Right, so there's like social identity power dynamics, as well as like institutional politics power dynamics, and then just like taking up space or actually using their power to not show up and to not practice vulnerability in some of the pieces of community norms that we had articulated. And so it put Kyle and I in this interesting place of, we don't have any of like the political repercussions that others might have, right? That's part of the benefit of being consultants. So we can be that mirror to an institution or to an individual saying like, hey, I'm noticing something. Do you want to talk about this? Do you want to engage? And so we did bring it as like an issue to talk about with the group, noticing, that people seem to be showing up in different ways, and naming that we felt that there were elements of power that were very, very palpable in the room, but were not being talked about. And to some extent, I think there was some engagement, people saying like, yeah, it definitely doesn't feel comfortable. I don't feel like everyone here is at the same level, and we're not all showing up the same way. But most of those reflections came from those who had less power to start with, right? Which is maybe to be expected. And so I think, we did the best we could to kind of push an individual to kind of think about how he might be hiding in some of his positional power, and so not doing some of the work that we were asking. But at the same time, we didn't want this space that was supposed to be about facilitation, skill development for a group of 20 individuals to be entirely co-opted by one person who was like refusing to engage, and like, kind of maybe we would even say like abusing some of his power and creating, some less helpful power dynamics in the group. So, we addressed it a little bit, but we also tried to kind of move on and change things up in terms of the way that groups were formatted, and who was talking and pair sharing with whom, to kind of mitigate any kind of real detriment. But I think that was definitely a time where there was like, wow, so many different pieces of power and privilege coming into play, and us doing the best that we can. But even as a facilitator, you can't force someone to participate or to show up in the way that you want. So you have to figure out how to do the best to engage, to try to make meaning with the group, and then kind of keep it moving so that there can still be learning and growth for everyone. So. Yeah,
that sounds like a challenging but worthwhile experience for everybody. And I think one of the things that I was thinking about both in that conversation and in one of the earlier points you were both making was this idea of like creating space, of like how we as facilitators, that's like a really common phrasing I think that we're really comfortable with, is this idea of like creating space. And there's also
holding space.
What's that? Holding space. Even more abstract and just holding. But yeah, I would just love to know so one of the things that I wrote down earlier was, what are some things that you both do to create those authorship spaces, or to try to invite people to share in that shared power dynamic? I was wondering if there were specific things that you kind of go in with to create those spaces.
Well, so one thing that I was going to say earlier about sort of some of the situations where power dynamics are going to be a thing, is that you sort of have to be really intentional from the outset in talking about everybody here is a learner, everybody here is a teacher, and usually you do those things in the sort of the community norms, ground rule aspect of the dialogue. And I think that's a really important way to kind of to set that expectation about what a space will be like, right? Is from the outset sort of setting the expectations, and you can call it whatever you want to call it. But I think just letting the group know how you're going to communicate, how you're going to navigate conflict when it comes up. I think that's one really great way about sort of creating or holding a space, however you want to call it. But one thing that sort of we've adopted and kind of made as a part of our practice is this idea of brave space. So a lot of times when you start to do those community norms in a dialogue, you talk about safe space. This is something that you all, I'm sure, are very familiar with. And I think that we understand that means something very specific. And I think when you're talking about a dialogue around topics like social justice, diversity, inclusion, you can't guarantee that anyone is actually going to feel safe ever. Everybody has a different level of comfort and a different level of safety. And so instead of shooting for safety in the group, I think we try and aim for bravery. So trying to create a space where everybody feels like they can be courageous, share, to be vulnerable, to be who they want to be. So I think that's one thing that we've really taken on in terms of creating space.
Yeah. So, and I think another key piece of the brave space is that we articulate up front to groups, like, probably if we're doing this work well, there are going to be moments that you're going to be really uncomfortable, and that you might actually not like all of the time that we spend with you, and that's okay with us. And so kind of, putting that disclaimer and saying, for us, we believe that transformation, that social change, that like personal epiphanies that can result in renewed or new commitments to social justice, that oftentimes comes at the edge of your comfort zone, where you're, really looking into areas of growth and learning. And so I think that framing of that value of bravery and that, we don't want anyone to get like shut down or excluded from a conversation, but also we're not super, super concerned with you feeling like really, really good the whole time, because sometimes growth doesn't feel good. And so, and that isn't always a popular way to start a conversation, but that is something that we've found to be, it's important, and it's, for us, I think articulating that honestly to the groups that we're working with is really important for us. So that's another piece kind of with that space, and just kind of letting people know this is where we're coming from. This is kind of our educational consulting perspective, and we're here to process with you, like during, after. We always continue to follow up with folks, but I think articulating that value early on is really helpful for us in trying to then follow through and really create that space.
Meg and I were facilitating a town hall a couple weeks ago, and there was this point where someone was like, I'm just not really comfortable with this conversation. In the back of my mind, I was like, awesome. We're doing something right. Sorry. We did name it up front. That's always huge, and I love that you all acknowledge that. Okay, so we're at 1:45 Central, 2:45 your time. I've got a few kind of like rapid fire questions, and I'm sure Meg has many more questions too. This conversation has already flown by. Are y'all good for like 5 more minutes?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So my first one is, what's a thing that when you started facilitating you didn't know that now looking back you can't believe you facilitated without knowing?
That is a really good one.
I know this is supposed to be rapid fire, right?
Yeah.
But I realized, because there's so much I didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's that
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know it was okay to not know a bunch of things.
Ooh.
I think I spent a lot of my early years of facilitating trying to fake it till I make it, like trying to create these spaces and doing the best I could and not knowing things, and instead of owning that and knowing that was okay as a facilitator, really trying to like diminish that and yeah, so I think...
Oh, that's great. That's really actually profound.
I think for me it was that I didn't know that I wasn't a done cookie. I thought that I had like already baked and already arrived once I stood in front of the group as the facilitator. But in fact, what was going to happen is through my years of facilitation, I learned just how wrong I was and how much growth I still have to do and how much growth I would do through the process of facilitation.
Good too. Meg, do you have one?
Yeah, so when we first connected with you all about facilitating XYZ, we didn't tell you much, but we kind of just gave you the outline of what we hope this website will bring. What were, like, maybe one thing each that you were like, oh, okay, I'm excited about this idea? What was something you were excited about?
For me, I was really excited about this idea of videos as a way to kind of teach and engage and offer professional development for folks who are trying to figure out, like, how do I facilitate? What does that look like? Because a lot of the resources that exist out there, it's maybe not as interactive or engaging, and so it just seemed like a new model that could really add to kind of the skill development for aspiring and continuing to grow facilitators.
Mm-hmm. For me, it was the community piece. So, like this conversation that we're having right now is a great example of just being able to process what it's like to be a facilitator, bouncing ideas off of each other, and the more opportunities that I get to do that, the better facilitator I can be. So that's a really exciting piece, I think.
Cool. I'm excited about both those things too. So this is my last question. Meg, do you have another one? Because I think this is a good one to end on if you've got one you want. Okay.
Yeah, great.
I'm noticing now, and I didn't notice this last time, the pictures behind y'all are clearly travel-centric, right? You're both travelers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In what ways has travel, or I guess other aspects of your identity, informed your facilitation or your social justice education?
Such a good question. It's really interesting that you asked this because just 2 days ago, I was kind of reflecting on that piece. We had a speaker come to our campus. We're doctoral students, and we had a speaker come, and he was talking about like spiritual and faith identity, and how in social justice dialogues and facilitation, we actually don't really focus on that identity very much, and how we need to do more of that. And I was reflecting on why I don't do that in my own facilitation. And I think part of it is that talking about spirituality and faith makes you reconcile some of the inconsistencies that comes along with the social justice worldview. And so with a social justice worldview, we're supposed to be like all accepting and all welcoming of everyone. But then if you start to think about like spirituality, faith, and world religion, there are actually some perspectives and some opinions within religions and other worldviews that don't seem so inclusive or don't seem so welcoming. And so to be accepting of those people seems like contradictory. And so how do we reconcile that? And I think one way is just to not talk about faith and spirituality. But I think one way that I've really tried to do that is through my experience traveling. So, I've had the privilege of visiting countries where they practice Islam, as a part of their national heritage, but also as a part of their culture. It's just a part of their everyday lives. And so being able to go to a place where, I get to go inside a mosque and see how they pray, how they practice, but my friend who identifies as a woman, she doesn't get to go in. She doesn't get to see what it's like inside. And so, having an experience like that really sort of forced me to kind of, reconcile, understand how does this fit within my own worldview, where do these people fall, how do I, accept and love them as well as, identify as a feminist. And so, I think that kind of experience traveling, I don't think it would happen really as real and as authentically in any other way.
Mm-hmm. For me, I think travel is a great reminder of the ways in which social justice conversations can really be the thread that connect people across the world. I think oftentimes, I can find myself really getting steeped in conversations of racial justice, for instance, in the context of the U.S. And these are necessary conversations, and there is so much intensity that's happening right now in our national discourse in really important ways. And it's only in those moments that when I travel that I recognize, wow, the racial oppression of communities of color in the U.S. is absolutely connected to the trafficking of young women in other countries, and that's connected to prison pipelines in other spaces, and looking at how injustice in one space and community is not just connected to other elements of injustice in that community, but it's connected in a global way. And I think that helps me keep perspective. It also, I think, continues to help me think about how am I having these conversations. When I say social justice in the U.S., the types of things that triggers is very different. We've done consulting and facilitation in parts of Central Europe and in parts of East Asia, and when we introduce the concept of social justice in those spaces, the identities that are most salient are different because of the cultures and because of the contexts. And I think remembering that we need to really value other perspectives and recognize that these stories and this journey is really a global one, is an important kind of grounding for the work that we do. So I think in that way, traveling absolutely connects to how we understand and explore and continue to commit ourselves to a journey of social justice.
Great. Oh, and that, I think that circles right back to why I'm so excited about Vital, is the import that you put on both our individual journeys and our roles in helping others find their journeys or find their way in their journeys. That's something I'm really excited about. Okay. Well, we're definitely at time. Y'all, thank you so much for doing this with us again. I'm really excited for this to go on YouTube and for people to be able to find whatever value in this that they can find. Is there a place where people can find you online easily if they want to read more of your stuff, find your book, whatever?
Absolutely. So folks can connect with us on social media, Twitter, at Ashlee Consult. We're on Facebook. Also our website, ashleeconsulting.com. Great information about places that we'll be heading out west to California in December and January. And, you know, definitely updates about the progress of our crowdfund as we're in these last couple of days. And then just the next adventures and processes that we go on as we continue to build our business and hopefully continue to engage and support others on their social justice journeys.
Awesome. Well, thank you both again for doing this. It's hard to cut it off because it's just such a engaging conversation. But yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I personally got a lot out of this conversation, and I'm so excited to have had this little community moment and for many future community moments.
Absolutely.
Same
Thank
here.
you both so much for your time. We're so excited to see what happens with your Kickstarter campaign, and are eager for the full unveiling and release of all of your resources and your upcoming books. So thanks so much for inviting us and spending time together.
Yeah, thank you.
You too. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.